So welcome back, guys, to another video. And as you can see, I'm back in my room and I wanted to talk about Dune. I rewatched Dune Part 2 last night, and this is not going to be a review of either Dune Part 1 or Part 2, but I'm going to talk about both, and specifically regarding the world building and the production of these movies. But yeah, this is coming from someone who has never read the books at all. So let's get into it. So first things first, I want to talk about Dune Part 1. I rewatched the trailers in preparation for this video, and when rewatching the trailers, I found myself kind of confused or surprised that I was excited to see this movie. This might come as a shock to some people, but I'm not actually a huge sci-fi person. The reason being that typically with sci-fi movies, there's a ton of terminology and history that you kind of have to learn. And, a lot of times it ends up coming out as like gibberish. And I think for Dune Part 1, on my very first watch, I was very confused. There's a lot of information, and Part 1 is definitely very information dense. But I think one of the saving graces of the movie, and obviously this carries throughout Dune Part 2 as well, is the production of the movie. I've seen comparisons between the 1980s Dune movie versus the modern day Dune movies, and each scene seems so meticulously crafted. And one of my favorite aspects is specifically the differences in the cultures between the peoples of different worlds within the movie. An example that that comes to mind for me is the Harkonnens, for example. In the movie, the Harkonnens are it's a very brutalist empire, kind of, that have all these bald people. The aesthetic is very black and white. The architecture is very representative of their personality. But not only that, the Baron for the Harkonnen people, I think that his character is very terrifying within the first movie. I think that because the first movie is so information dense, having to have characters that are set up in a way that makes them more interesting or that personifies them in a specific way, it really helps to make the movie more interesting, because when the movie is so dialogue heavy, it is so dependent on the characters that are within the movie. And I think that, the script, it does a great job of kind of, characterizing everyone. And I don't know how much, is taken straight from the source material, but I think that, regardless of how much is, taken directly from the source material, the way that it was acted out and delivered within the movie is really great. Another one of my favorite aspects about the movie that have to do with the production is costume design. Sorry about that. I would say that I've never been huge into the idea of learning about the costume design and makeup process within, movies and all that. And, after watching the Dune movies, I have a greater appreciation for these aspects within the film. And my favorite costumes from the movie are the Fremen outfits. In my opinion, they just seem really cool, but more than that, they were very functionally designed. Granted, there's probably a lot of description about what these outfits are to look like within the book, but as someone who's never read the book, to me, they just seem very cool, and I love how detailed every outfit is within the movie, and also all the props within the movie as well, because that kind of goes along with the idea that to characterize a culture, you need to have very specific items to the culture. You need to have very specific, things to it that you can, point out specifically. And I think that the Fremen identity, and honestly the identity of every culture and world within this movie, is just so unique and greatly defined, in my opinion. And I enjoy that aspect of the movie a lot. And, as regards to the information dense part of this movie, a lot of people don't like this first movie because of that reason. And I think it's fair, and I think that it definitely makes sense. It's also not a short movie by any means, but I've watched this movie 3 times within the last 3 weeks, and I found myself enjoying the movie more and more upon every watch. And I think that just has to do with the fact that on my first watch, I was very captivated by the whole political power moves that these different worlds are making within this intergalactic empire. I've never been a huge Star Wars fan, but something about the way that it is shown within the Dune world really captivated me. And after watching it the first time, I spent some time looking into the lore of the books, and the world that uh, this movie takes place in. And I just found myself very fascinated by everything and the plot, more and more. I think that a second watch for this movie would probably help a lot of people, although that's another 3 hours that you're kind of having to shell out for this movie. But in my opinion, it is completely worth it. On my second watch especially, I definitely feel as if the runtime of the movie became less of a problem, and the fact that I actually understood what was going on made every single scene within the movie interesting to me. Whereas the first time I watched it, I was like, oh, like, when are we going to get to the action? But then on my second watch, it was very much so like, oh, like, I actually understood what was going on here a lot better, and I understand the purpose of everything. And so that felt really gratifying on the second watch through. And, switching gears over to Dune Part 2, and I'll try to keep this as spoiler free as possible. And if I do end up spoiling anything, I will try to, leave a disclaimer. So just kind of be cautious, and, you might get spoiled a little bit. But once again, Dune Part 2, amazing movie. And I think that this movie really solidifies these two movies in particular as just an epic. There's something so gratifying to having spent so much time with the first movie and seeing that payoff with the second movie. And when I rewatched Dune 2 last night, something that I really was paying attention to was Timothy's acting. And I didn't mention this when talking about the part one of Dune Part 1, but everyone's acting within these movies is phenomenal. And I think Timothy within Part 2 in particular, like, he is really showcasing a lot of his talent, and it really shows, in my opinion. So Dune Part 2, I am not going to talk about as much, because frankly a lot of the parts that I like about Dune Part 2, I've already mentioned as to why I like in Part 1. It's kind of the same thing. So it has to do with the production of the aesthetic of everything, and the prop design, the costume design, everything in regards to that. Everyone looked amazing within this movie, and there's like so many outfits in Dune Part 2 in particular that I'm like, that was pretty awesome. So yeah, I would like to watch Dune Part 2 a third time, but I don't know if I have the time to do so. Give me a moment. So sorry for the interruption. So anyways, continuing with what I was just saying, I think that Dune Part 2 has a greater collection of impactful moments in comparison to the first movie. And obviously that is a byproduct of having that first movie to set these moments up. But in Dune Part 2, for example, I think that the Colosseum scene, or in fact the last hour of this movie, are so well done, and they have so many just moments in them. I think that a lot of films, they tend to have one or two moments in them that really stand out, whereas I think that Dune Part 2 has maybe over five to 10 moments that I think any person that's watched a movie can actively say that like made the movie for them. I think that that's very rare for any movie to have that many kind of moments within them. But once again, this is a result of having a movie that is incredibly well crafted, and there's so much attention to detail, and even just the smallest things, once again, from the costumes to the props to the architecture to the creative decisions involved with separating the cultures and the peoples of this kind of universe that we're trying to get into. And at the end of Dune 2, it once again doesn't have a completely tied off ending. And that to me, with any other movie, it might have felt like, oh, that was unfortunate that the story, the overarching story, didn't seem to finish. But I think that with the Dune universe, it leaves me more and more excited for for a third movie to come potentially, especially with, what this movie has set up for, in store for us. And so, once again, Dune Part 1 and Part 2, these are two beautifully crafted stories, incredibly well produced and well acted. It's very difficult, in my opinion, to fault either of these two movies for anything. And even if there are flaws within these two movies, I think the experience of these two movies alone helps to kind of craft such a unique experience. And once again, this is such a well done job by the cinematographers and the director and the actors on set and just the entire team that is behind these movies. I can really sense that passion for this project, and I think that's very rare for most movies nowadays. So that is obviously a very, very welcome thing to see. So thank you guys for watching this video. I know that I was very broad as far as some of the points that I was trying to make within this video, but that's because I don't want to dive in too much specifically about specific plot points or anything like that. But once again, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you guys again next week. Bye.